Chapter 8 is the story of photosynthesis, the process that feeds the planet, including you and me. And we see here many of the green representatives of the plant kingdom, which is just one type of organisms that photosynthesize. Here are our learning objectives for Chapter 8. If you want to pause and write these down, go right ahead. Otherwise, buckle up, because here we go. Okay, first learning objective, what is the chemical reaction for photosynthesis? Well, it can be summarized very simply, more or less, with this equation here. We take some carbon dioxide and some water, we add some light energy, and we get sugar, or photosynthate, which is the name for the sugar that comes from photosynthesis. We get some oxygen, and we also get some water back on this side. You may notice that this reaction looks just like the one for cellular respiration, pretty much, only going backwards. And it is similar in a lot of ways. A lot of the parts will sound similar, and you should recognize them. But it's very different in others. When we are burning glucose, we're consuming oxygen and turning carbon in sugar into ATP from the energy contained in those chemical bonds. Here we're actually using carbon dioxide and light energy to reverse the process. So why do we have water on both sides of the equation? The answer is that when we take in the carbon dioxide, or when plants do, and they take in the water, those atoms don't all end up in the same place. So the carbon has to go into the sugar, and the hydrogens from water go into the sugar, but then some of them end up back in water. Some of that oxygen ends up in water also, and the oxygen that we are breathing in actually comes from the water. And I'll tell you more about this in the light reactions. But just a little accounting of where those atoms come from and go to is illustrated in this slide. So another important thing to take note of is that photosynthesis is definitely a redox process. It's an oxidation reduction reactions, and the electrons that we harvested from glucose in cellular respiration, well, they got there through photosynthesis. And similarly, we have to use redox processes to make that happen. Now, photosynthesis is a very energy-intensive process. It absorbs a lot of energy. And the energy to make it happen comes from sunlight. And in photosynthesis, carbon dioxide, which remember became oxidized when we produced ATP in respiration, is getting to be reduced in photosynthesis. And the oxygen that is in water becomes oxidized. So yes, we're even oxidizing oxygen. That's how strong of a process this is, because oxygen really doesn't like to have electrons taken away from it. It doesn't like to lose any of its electron density. Okay, learning objective 2. This is fairly straightforward. What organisms undergo photosynthesis? Well, certainly plants undergo photosynthesis, as do the things that we call algae. Algae are essentially eukaryotic organisms that aren't plants, but that do photosynthesize. So some of them are large and multicellular, like seaweeds and kelps. But then there are a lot of unicellular algae out there that you might have growing as like pond scum or something like that. And their contribution to photosynthesis is significant. A large percentage of photosynthesis that's going on is coming from the world's oceans, as well as the plants on the land. In addition, you may recall from when we talked about cells and endosymbiont theory that the reason that plants can photosynthesize is that they had a early eukaryotic cell that picked up something like a bacterium that became the chloroplast that they use for photosynthesis. And those bacteria we still see today as cyanobacteria. Cyanobacteria means blue bacteria, but they're kind of blue-green, and they used to be called blue-green algae, but they're not really algae because they're not eukaryotic. And then there's another group of bacteria that perform a very different type of photosynthesis, and these are your purple sulfur bacteria. So 5 different groups of organisms that go through photosynthesis, can perform photosynthesis, but just a handful of them that are really important to us. And most of what I'm going to tell you about is the photosynthesis that occurs in plants. Okay, so we're going to describe different structures within the plant that are necessary for photosynthesis. So, the green parts of plants are the photosynthetic parts of plants. So, like the trunk of a tree and the roots, they don't photosynthesize. They don't really have access to light. But the leaves are essentially adapted for performing photosynthesis. And in a leaf, you're going to find that they've got lots of cells that are rich in chloroplast. They may have 30 or 40 chloroplasts per cell in order to perform photosynthesis. We also have veins in the leaves that bring water up from the roots. The water is absolutely necessary as part of photosynthesis. And then underneath the leaves, we have these structures that kind of look like little mouths, and they have a name that means basically mouths. They are the stomata, or just one stoma. And the stomata allow carbon dioxide from the atmosphere into the leaf and releases oxygen gas, which is produced by photosynthesis, out of the leaf. So within a leaf, which is an organ of the tree or plant, you're going to find the chloroplast, the veins, the stomata. And then at the cellular level, you're going to find lots and lots of chloroplast within these mesophyll cells. Mesophyll means middle of the leaf. And inside, you may recall, you've got these 2 membranes on the outside. And then inside, just like we saw in mitochondria, there's a whole bunch of membrane-bound structures that maximize the surface area of those membranes. But instead of cristae, like we saw in mitochondria, we have thylakoids. And thylakoids are kind of disc-shaped, coin, pancake, whatever you think of as a disc. That's what thylakoids look like. And they are arranged in stacks, and a stack of thylakoids is called a granum. And within a chloroplast, you'll find multiple grana arranged within that chloroplast. And inside the thylakoids, there is a space for chemical reactions to occur, and that's very important for reasons that will sound familiar if you recall much about what happened in cellular respiration. All right, so all of this photosynthesis is reliant upon solar energy, sunlight. So we have to talk a little bit about solar energy and how it gets into the plants and what the plants do with it. So we have to talk a little bit about solar energy, sunlight. Light is a type of energy. Light is just one small part of a much larger form of energy called electromagnetic energy. Electromagnetic energy helps us, it provides us with electricity. It also provides us with magnetism, and also do with the behavior of atoms at that level. But electromagnetic energy is different from other kinds of energy. It visible light is just one small part of the greater spectrum of electromagnetic energy. And it travels in rhythmic waves, kind of like waves on an ocean, only much, much more organized, much, like a wave on the beach. You can't necessarily predict when a wave is gonna hit you. You can predict when the tides roll in and out, but knowing exactly when a wave is going to break over you if you're splashing around in the surf, waves of sunlight are a lot more regular. So the wavelength is the distance between crests of waves, and it also helps determine what type of electromagnetic energy we're dealing with. And I'll show you a picture here to kind of represent that in a second. So the electromagnetic spectrum is the entire range of electromagnetic energy, from very, very short, very, very high energy gamma rays down to very, very long, very wavelength, very, very low energy radio waves. And visible light is kind of right in the middle of all of that. And that's what plants use for photosynthesis. And that's what produces the colors that we see with our eyes. That's what our eyes are capable of detecting. So although light acts like a wave, we also know that that it's made up of discrete particles that are called photons. Okay, so light moves in waves as particles, and they range from very, very short and very, very high energy waves like gamma rays and X-rays, down to very, very long and very, very low energy waves like microwaves and radio waves. Kind of more or less smack dab in the middle of all of that is the range of visible light. And you may have heard that a rainbow, you can remember the colors of the rainbow using the mnemonic device Roy G. Biv, which stands for red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. But in terms of going from the highest energy photons to the lowest energy photons, that's the backwards order. It should really be Vib G Yob, Vib G Roy, Vib G Yor is what it should be, because it's violet, indigo, blue, green, yellow, orange, red. And the wavelengths of light that we can see run from about 380 nanometers or billionths of a meter to 750 billionths of a meter or nanometers, as you can see here. And we say that the wavelength and the energy are inversely correlated, which means as wavelength gets bigger, energy gets lower, and vice versa. So plants can detect light or react in response to light by using photosynthetic pigments. And a pigment is a substance that absorbs visible light. Different pigments will absorb different wavelengths. And when a photon of light comes upon a pigment or a surface, one of three things is going to happen. Either the light is going to be absorbed, or it's going to be reflected, or it's going to be transmitted. Okay? So absorption, reflection, and transmission are the three possible outcomes. And I have an analogy for this, and it's kind of a violent one, so I'm sorry for that, but it helps me to remember. There are three condemned prisoners that are being lined up for execution by firing squad. And the first one is lined up and shot, and the bullet goes into the person and kills them, but it doesn't come out the other side. That person's body has absorbed the bullet. The second person is lined up and shot, and the bullet goes straight through them, in one side, out the other. That person has transmitted the bullet. The bullet has gone straight through them. And in this story, as I usually tell it, the third person is Cam Newton, and Cam Newton is lined up, and then he is shot. But because Cam Newton is so powerful, the bullet just bounces right off of him. He has reflected the bullet. So that's the three things that can happen with photons as they come upon a pigment or something like that, as they can be absorbed, reflected, or transmitted. So the reason that leaves appear green is because chlorophyll reflects and transmits green light. So the green light bounces off and it goes straight through those leaves, and the other wavelengths of light are absorbed. So here's some visible light from the sun, which appears white. And as it comes upon the thylakoids, where the chlorophyll is found, so the pigments of light are the wavelengths of light are absorbed. You can see them all here being absorbed, but the green light is being transmitted, going straight through, and being reflected and bouncing off of those pigments. So we can produce what's called an absorption spectrum, showing what wavelengths of light are absorbed versus being reflected or transmitted. And we find that chlorophyll A, one of the types of chlorophyll, best uses violet, blue, and red light for photosynthesis. And the action spectrum kind of shows how all of the pigments work together to make the total spectrum of light that can be absorbed by a plant. So chlorophyll A and B are the two main photosynthetic pigments, but there are some what we call accessory pigments like carotenoids, like the word carrot. They appear to be a bit oranger because they transmit and they reflect colors of light that are orange shades of light. And all of these pigments work together to absorb as much sunlight as a plant can absorb. So all of these different pigments have different wavelengths that they may absorb and not transmit or reflect. But when we overlay them together, we get a curve that kind of looks like this, showing that all of these wavelengths of light are the best, where the peaks are highest for photosynthesis, and down where it's low, that's where plants have a difficult time photosynthesizing because they can't absorb that light.